She learned the language of silence long before she learned Korean. In Lagos, silence meant listening for footsteps outside the door. In Johannesburg, it meant knowing when not to ask questions. In Seoul, it meant survival. Amma rarely spoke at work. That was the rule, spoken or unspoken, she never bothered to clarify. The Han River estate didn't hire maids for conversation. It hired them for efficiency, invisibility, and obedience. She was good at all three. At 5 in the morning, the house was already awake. Not with voices, but with movement. Security cameras blinked. Doors unlocked themselves. Cars arrived without headlights. Men in dark coats entered and exited without looking at one another. Amma moved through it all like a shadow. She cleaned the glass walls overlooking the river. She folded jackets that smelled faintly of gun oil and expensive cologne. She memorized the weight of objects she was never supposed to touch. And she never ever looked directly at the man who owned the house. Everyone knew his name. No one said it out loud. Kang Min-jae. In Seoul, his name existed the way storms did. Acknowledged, tracked, never challenged. He didn't run gangs the way movies described. He owned construction firms, shipping interests, and private security contracts. The violence attached to his empire was quiet, surgical, and always deniable. Amma knew this not because anyone told her, but because of how people behaved when he entered a room. Silence didn't fall. It sharpened. The first time she saw him up close, he was standing by the window, looking out over the river as if he were measuring it. He wore no jewelry, no visible weapon, just a dark coat and gloves. He never removed them indoors. She kept her eyes down and cleaned. That should have been the end of it. Her shifts ran from dawn until the house decided she was finished. Some days that meant noon. Other days it meant midnight. The estate didn't operate on schedules. It operated on necessity. She had learned not to complain, not to ask, not to notice the briefcases that arrived locked and left empty, or the men who entered through the front door and departed through the garage. Her room was beneath the servants' quarters, small, clean, functional. A bed, a lamp, a single window that faced the wall of the neighboring building. She had lived in worse. The other staff avoided her. Not out of hostility, but caution. She was foreign. She was black. She was useful enough to remain, which meant she had seen something worth keeping quiet about. They were right. On a Tuesday morning in late November, as frost formed on the windows and the city prepared for winter, Amma carried fresh linens to the 3rd floor. The marble floors gleamed. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and something sharper. Antiseptic, maybe. She noticed it but didn't pause. She turned the corner near the east wing. And heard something that didn't belong. Breathing. Uneven. Controlled but wrong. She stopped walking. In her years of work across 3 countries, she had learned one rule that mattered more than all the others. Danger announces itself quietly. She stood in the hallway, linens in her arms, and listened. The sound came from behind a door that was never supposed to be open. Amma did not knock. She had been sent to the east wing by the head housekeeper. Specific instructions, specific rooms. This was one of them. She pushed the door open slowly, expecting emptiness. She found Kang Min-jae instead. He was seated on the edge of the bed, coat still on, one hand braced against the mattress. His breathing was shallow. His jaw clenched, then released, then clenched again. Pain. Visible, but restrained. Amma did not move closer. She did not speak. She noticed details instead. The pallor beneath his skin. The way his left hand trembled. Not from fear, but effort. The faint stain on his shirt was dark and already drying. Internal bleeding, she thought. Or a deep puncture wound. She had seen both before. He looked up. Not startled. Not surprised. Just aware. Their eyes met for the first time. There was no threat in his expression. No demand. Only assessment. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, in Korean. His voice was steady. Too steady. Amma bowed her head slightly. Not submissive, not defiant. Professional. "I was sent," she replied, her accent soft but precise. For the linens. A pause. He studied her the way a man studies a locked door, not to admire it, but to decide whether it will open. You have medical training, he said. It wasn't a question. Amma's pulse quickened. She kept her face neutral. Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he stood. The movement cost him. She saw it, the split-second loss of balance, the tightening around his eyes. He recovered before most people would have noticed. Most people were not trained to notice. You will forget what you saw, he said. I will, she replied. She meant it. She turned to leave. He didn't stop her. She walked down the corridor with the same measured pace she had arrived with. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. But her mind was cataloging symptoms she couldn't ignore. The tremor in his hand wasn't muscle fatigue. It was compensation. The pallor wasn't exhaustion. It was blood loss. The controlled breathing wasn't discipline. It was survival. Men like Kang Min-jae did not survive by ignoring warning signs. Unless he was being prevented. That night, she lay awake in her small room beneath the servants' quarters, replaying the rhythm of his breathing. It was wrong. Controlled, but deteriorating. She had been dismissed. She had obeyed. But she knew what 48 hours of internal bleeding looked like. And she knew what happened when powerful men refused care. She stared at the ceiling and made no decision. Not yet. The next evening, as she carried a tray through the corridor outside his private study, she heard raised voices for the first time. Not shouting. Arguing. You don't need a doctor, a man said. You need rest. You don't decide that, Kang Min-jae replied. Amma stopped walking. She didn't turn. She didn't listen openly. The voices continued. Measured. Insistent. Wrong. The men advising him were minimizing something they didn't understand. Or they understood perfectly and were lying. She adjusted her grip on the tray and walked forward. As she passed the open doorway, she let one finger tap twice against the porcelain cup. Twice. Pause. Once. A pattern. It was a signal she had learned years ago in a refugee clinic, used when words were dangerous and mistakes were fatal. Internal bleeding. Immediate attention required. The conversation inside the room stopped. Not abruptly. Intentionally. She continued walking. Her hands were steady, but her spine burned with awareness. She had crossed a line. That night, she was summoned. Not by security. Not by management. By Kang Min-jae himself. The room was different this time. Lights low. Windows dark. The city reflected like a constellation of debts and promises. He stood near the window, coat removed. Shirt still on. No visible weapon, but the air felt weighted. You signaled, he said. She stood with her hands folded in front of her. Yes. Why? Because you are injured, she replied. And because the people advising you are wrong. A faint shift in his expression. Not amusement. Recognition. You're not afraid, he observed. I am, she said. But fear doesn't change facts. Silence. He studied her again, more carefully this time. You will examine me, he said. Now. I will not, she replied. The air shifted. Not with anger. With interest. Explain, he said. I don't work without conditions, Amma said calmly. I don't lie. I don't hide information. And if I determine you need outside care, you will listen. Another pause. Long enough to feel dangerous. She did not look away. He nodded once. Proceed. Two men entered the room. Security, she assumed. They positioned themselves near the door. Watching her, not him. Kang Min-jae gestured to the chair. Amma set down her supplies and began. She worked efficiently. Minimal touch. No wasted motion. Remove your shirt, she said. He did. The wound was exactly where she expected. Left side, below the ribs. The stitching was clean but shallow. Whoever had closed it hadn't accounted for depth. She pressed lightly near the entry point. His jaw tightened. Internal bleeding, she confirmed. The sutures are holding the surface, but the damage beneath is worsening. You're compensating with muscle control, but that won't last. How long? He asked. 48 hours before collapse. Maybe less. One of the men near the door shifted. Kong Min-jae didn't move. What do you need? He asked. Time, she said. And privacy. He glanced at the men. They left. The door closed. Amma opened her kit and began the real work. She cleaned the wound, identified the internal rupture, and applied controlled pressure to redirect the bleeding. Her hands were steady. Her focus is absolute. Kong Min-jae watched her the entire time. You've done this before, he said. Yes. Where? Places where doctors don't come. She didn't elaborate. He didn't ask again. The process took 30 minutes. When she finished, she stepped back and cleaned her hands. You'll need monitoring, she said. The bleeding is controlled, but not stopped. If the pressure shifts, you'll deteriorate quickly. Will you monitor it? He asked. If you allow it. I do. She packed her supplies. Her hands moved with the same efficiency they always did, but her mind was calculating. The wound was clean. Too clean. The angle was deliberate. The depth was measured. This wasn't an attack. It was precision. She glanced at him once, briefly. He was watching her with the same calm assessment he had used in the East Wing. Testing. Always testing. She said nothing. You may leave, he said. She bowed slightly and turned toward the door. Amma. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her name. Yes. You will return tomorrow, he said. Same time. I will. She left the room. The hallway was empty. The house had returned to its usual silence. Cameras blinking, doors locked, men moving without sound. Amma walked back to her quarters and sat on the edge of her bed. She stared at her hands. They were clean now, but she could still feel the texture of the wound beneath her fingers. Controlled. Deliberate. Intentional. Kong Min-jae had injured himself. And she had just proven she could be trusted not to say so. Days passed. She was reassigned. No longer a maid. Not officially anything. She moved between rooms unseen, summoned when needed, dismissed without explanation. She treated injuries that never appeared in records. She listened more than she spoke. The house revealed itself slowly. Men arrived with cuts that looked like warning messages. Others left with bandages they would remove before reaching the street. She saw patterns, loyalty rewarded with silence, mistakes acknowledged with absence. The estate wasn't a fortress. It was a filter. People entered. Few remained. One evening, she was called to a room on the second floor. A man sat in a chair, his hand wrapped in a cloth that was already soaked through. Fix it, someone said from the doorway. She examined the injury. 2 fingers broken deliberately, clean fractures, applied with precision. This will hurt, she told the man. He nodded. She set the bones and wrapped them properly. He didn't make a sound. When she finished, he left without speaking. The man in the doorway watched her. You don't ask questions, he observed. No. Why not? Because the answer doesn't change the work. He nodded and left. Amma cleaned her supplies and returned them to the cabinet. The house operated on a logic she was beginning to understand. Pain was information. Injury was communication. Healing was a form of loyalty. Kong Min-jae never explained. He never had to. She saw him twice that week, once in passing, once in his study. Both times, he looked fully recovered. The wound had healed without complication. Because she had treated it correctly. Because she had said nothing about how it was made. On the 7th day, she was summoned again. This time, the room was different. Larger. A desk. Maps. Documents she didn't try to read. Kong Min-jae stood near the window. You've been here 2 weeks, he said. Yes. You've treated 11 people. She didn't confirm. He already knew. You haven't asked why, he continued. No. Why not? Because you're testing who notices, she said. And who stays silent. He turned to face her. For the first time, something close to approval crossed his expression. You understand, he said. I do. Then you understand what happens next. She waited. You will continue, he said. You will treat injuries. You will observe. And you will tell me what you see. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was an assignment. She met his eyes. And if I refuse? You won't. He was right. She had already crossed the line. Staying silent about the self-inflicted wound had been a choice. Treating the others had been confirmation. She nodded once. Kang Min-jae returned to the window. You're dismissed. She left. That night, as Seoul's lights flickered against the frost, Amma sat in her room and thought about tests. Kang Min-jae had injured himself to see who would act without permission. She had. And now she was part of something she didn't fully understand. But she knew one thing with certainty. The house didn't test loyalty. It tested the usefulness. And she had just proven hers. The gala was announced 3 days in advance. A winter charity event near Gangnam. Art, donors, cameras. The kind of gathering where power wore tailored suits and smiled for photographers. Amma was told she would attend. Not as a guest. As staff. She was given a black uniform, an earpiece, and instructions to remain behind the scenes. Her role was simple. Monitor the event, watch for medical emergencies, stay invisible. She had done this before in Johannesburg. Corporate events where wealthy men discussed investments while their staff ensured nothing interrupted the performance. This felt different. The venue was a private gallery overlooking the river. Glass walls. Marble floors. Art that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. Kang Min-jae arrived exactly on time. He wore a dark suit. No gloves. No visible security. He moved through the crowd with the same controlled presence he maintained in the house. Acknowledged but not approached. Watched but not questioned. He looked completely recovered. Amma watched from the service corridor near the stage. Her position gave her a clear view of the main floor. Donors circulated. Waiters carried champagne. A string quartet played something classical and forgettable. She scanned faces the way she had been taught, not for familiarity, but for inconsistency. Posture. Attention. Movement. Most guests were predictable. They talked. They laughed. They performed well with practiced ease. One man was different. He stood near the northwest corner, close to the stage but not watching the speakers. His suit fit, but his shoes were wrong. Functional, not fashionable. His hands stayed near his sides. His eyes tracked exits, not art. Amma's pulse quickened. She moved closer, staying behind the partition. The man shifted his weight. His jacket opened slightly. She saw the outline. Weapon. Close range. She didn't shout. She didn't run. She scanned the room until she found Kang Min-jae. He was speaking with a woman near the center of the floor. Polite, detached, performing normalcy. Amma caught his eye across the room and adjusted her bracelet. Once. Twice. Still. The signal. Kang Min-jae didn't look back. He didn't react. He stepped half a pace to the left. The shot came 3 seconds later. Not loud. Suppressed. The sound was swallowed by music and conversation. But the impact was visible. A man near the stage collapsed. Panic erupted. Security swarmed. Guests screamed and scattered. The shooter was tackled before he could fire again. Amma stayed where she was, pressed against the wall, watching. Kang Min-jae remained standing. Untouched. Come. The aftermath was contained within 15 minutes. Guests were escorted out through secured exits. The wounded man was removed on a stretcher. Police arrived but were redirected by private security before they reached the main floor. Amma was told to return to the estate. She obeyed. The house was quiet when she arrived. No voices. No movement. Just the usual rhythm of locked doors and blinking cameras. She went to her room and waited. 2 hours later, she was summoned. Kang Min-jae was in his study. Coat removed. Shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked exactly as he had before the gala. Composed, undisturbed. You signaled, he said. Yes. You identified the threat before my security did. Yes. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to her. She took it but didn't drink. The man who was shot, Kong Min-jae said. Do you know who he was? No. He was an accountant. He managed logistics for a shipping firm I acquired last year. Amma waited. The shooter wasn't targeting me, Kong Min-jae continued. He was targeting him. She kept her expression neutral. You knew, she said. I suspected. And you let it happen. I allowed it to proceed under controlled conditions, he corrected. The accountant had been selling information. The firm he worked for wanted confirmation. I provided the opportunity. Amma set down the glass. You used the gala as bait. I used the gala as proof. And if the shooter had missed? He wouldn't have. I positioned the target precisely. She understood then. The step to the left hadn't been evasion. It had been aligned. Kong Min-jae had moved the accountant into the shooter's line of fire. You could have stopped it, Amma said quietly. I could have. But you didn't. No. Silence settled between them. Amma thought about the panic, the screaming, the man on the stretcher. She thought about the precision required to allow violence without chaos. Why tell me this? She asked. Because you're no longer just treating injuries, Kong Min-jae said. You're observing decisions. And I need to know if you can separate what you see from what you feel. She met his eyes. I already have. He nodded slowly. The accountant will survive, he said. The wound was calculated. Non-fatal. He'll recover and understand the cost of betrayal. And the shooter? Gone. Amma didn't ask where. She knew better. Kong Min-jae returned to his desk. You did well tonight, he said. The signal saved time. Possibly lives. Possibly, she repeated. He glanced at her. You disagree? I think you already knew what would happen, she said. And you were testing whether I would act without knowing the full picture. A faint smile touched his mouth. Yes. She stood. Am I dismissed? You are. She turned toward the door. Amma. She stopped. You're not being protected, he said. You're being positioned. She didn't turn around. I know. Amma didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window in her small room, watching the city. Seoul stretched out below, lights flickering, traffic moving, people living lives that had nothing to do with calculated violence or controlled tests. She thought about Lagos. She thought about Johannesburg. She thought about why she had left. In Lagos, silence had been survival. In Johannesburg, it had been compliance. In Seoul, she had believed it would be a distance. But distance wasn't safety. It was just a different kind of proximity to danger. She had come to Korea because it was far from places where people expected her to break. Where survival meant learning which questions not to ask and which wounds not to notice. She had thought herself free of that. She wasn't. At 3 a.m, she was summoned again. This time, the location was different. A garage beneath the estate. Fluorescent lights. Concrete floors. The smell of oil and cold metal. A man sat in a chair, unconscious. Blood on his shirt. Breathing shallow. Kong Min-jae stood nearby. Failed a test, he said simply. Amma approached and examined the injury. Gunshot wound. Shoulder. Clean entry, no exit. The bullet was still inside. He needs a hospital, she said. He won't get one. She looked at Kong Min-jae. Then he'll die. Not if you remove the bullet. She had done field extractions before. In clinics without anesthesia. In rooms without proper light. She knew how. But this was different. This wasn't saving a life. This was maintaining deniability. If I do this, she said, he'll survive. Possibly. And if I don't? Certainly not. She stared at the unconscious man. He had failed a test. Whatever that meant in Kong Min-jae's world, it had earned him a bullet and a choice between painful survival and certain death. Amma set down her kit. "I'll need proper instruments," she said. "And antibiotics." Kong Min-jae nodded to someone she hadn't noticed in the shadows. Supplies appeared. She worked for 90 minutes. The bullet came out cleanly. The bleeding was controlled. The man would live. Whether he would remain in the house was another question. When she finished, she cleaned her hands and stood. Kong Min-jae was watching her. "You could have refused," he said. "I could have. Why didn't you?" She looked at the man, bandaged, breathing, unconscious. "Because refusing wouldn't have saved him," she said. "It would have just made me feel better about his death." Kong Min-jae said nothing. Amma walked toward the exit. She paused at the threshold. "I'm not staying because I agree with this," she said without turning around. "I know. Then why keep me?" "Because you act anyway." She left the garage and returned to her room. Dawn was approaching. The city was waking. She sat on her bed and considered leaving. Kong Min-jae wouldn't stop her. She was certain of that. He had given her space. No plea, no persuasion, no threat. Just consequences. And the knowledge that walking away wouldn't undo what she had already seen. Or what she had already done. Snow fell over Seoul 3 days later. Quiet, persistent, blanketing the city in a layer of white that softened the edges of everything. The Han River estate looked almost peaceful under the snow. Less fortress, more monument. Amma had treated 2 more people that week. Minor injuries. Tests of competence. Not loyalty. She was learning to distinguish between the two. On the night the snow fell heaviest, she was summoned to Kong Min-jae's study. The room was warmer than usual. A fire burned in the corner. Rare, expensive, controlled. He stood near the window, watching the city disappear beneath the snowfall. "Sit," he said. She did. He poured tea. Set a cup in front of her. Sat across from her at the low table. This was different. No injury. No emergency. No test she could identify. "Why Korea?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "Because it was far," she replied. "From what?" "From places where people expect you to break." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "You came here 4 years ago," he said. "On a work visa. Domestic employment. You worked for 3 families before this one." She didn't ask how he knew. "Yes. You left the second family after 6 months." No explanation given. She kept her expression neutral. "They asked me to do something I wouldn't do." "What?" "Lie to immigration about another worker's status." Kong Min-jae studied her. "You chose integrity over employment." "I chose not to be complicit." "There's a difference." "Sometimes." He sipped his tea. 10 years ago, he said, there was an incident in Busan. A warehouse fire. 17 people are trapped inside. Most of them are migrant workers, Filipinos, Vietnamese, a few from Africa. Amma's chest tightened. She remembered. Rescue teams arrived too late, Kong Min-jae continued. But one person was already inside. A medical volunteer who had been conducting health screenings nearby. She went in before the fire spread. Pulled out 6 people. Treated them on the street until ambulances arrived. He set down his cup. "That volunteer was you." Amma said nothing. "One of the people you saved," Kong Min-jae said, "was a logistics coordinator. He worked for me. I owed him a debt. When he survived, I owed you one." She felt the weight of the room shift. "You've been tracking me," she said quietly. "I've been aware of you. For 10 years. Yes. And you brought me here." "I had you recommended," he corrected. "Through channels you wouldn't recognize. When the position opened at this estate, your name appeared on a very short list." Amma stood. She needed to move. Needed air. Needed distance from the realization settling over her like the snow outside. "The signal," she said. "The wound. The gala." Tests, Kong Min-jae confirmed. Of what? Whether you would act without permission. Whether you could see violence and still choose precision. Whether you understand the difference between morality and usefulness. She turned to face him. You've been testing me since I arrived. Since before you arrived. The room felt smaller, colder. The other maids, Amma said. The reassignments. The injuries that don't appear in records. All part of the filter. And I passed. You did more than pass, Kong Min-jae said. You acted exactly as I needed you to. Not because you were told. Because you saw what needed to be done. Amma stared at him. This man who spoke in silences and tested loyalty with wounds. Who had orchestrated her presence in his house the way he orchestrated everything else. With patience, precision, and absolute control. Why tell me now? She asked. Because the tests are finished, he said. And you need to understand what you've agreed to. I haven't agreed to anything. You treated my wound without being asked. You signaled at the gala without being instructed. You removed a bullet from a man you'd never met because leaving him to die would have been worse. He stood and walked to the window. You've already agreed, he said. You just didn't know the terms. Amma felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Understanding. She had been chosen not because she was special. She had been chosen because she acted without needing orders. Because in a world built on tests and filters and controlled violence, that made her invaluable. The man in Busan, she said. The one I saved. Is he still alive? No. How did he die? Kong Min-jae looked at her. Doing his job. The answer was complete. The debt had been transferred. From a dead man to a living one. From rescue to retention. Amma walked to the door. Where are you going? Kong Min-jae asked. To think. About leaving? She paused. About staying. The snow continued through the night. Amma stood at her window, watching it fall. The city had gone quiet. No traffic, no voices, just the steady accumulation of white against glass. She thought about the man in Busan. She thought about the 6 people she had pulled from the fire. She thought about debt. In the morning, she was summoned one final time. Kong Min-jae's study. Same fire. Same tea. But this time, the weight was different. He didn't sit. Neither did she. I'm offering you a permanent position, he said. No preamble. No negotiation. Doing what? She asked. What you've already been doing. Treating injuries. Observing. Acting when necessary. That's not a job title. No. Then what is it? A role. Amma studied him. This man, who had tracked her for 10 years. Who had tested her without her knowledge. Who had positioned her exactly where he needed her to be. And if I refuse, she asked, you leave. Tonight. I'll arrange transportation. A recommendation. Money. You'll be protected on your way out. Protected from what? From the fact that you know too much. The honesty was almost startling. You'd let me go, she said. I don't keep people who don't choose to stay. But you'd watch me. Always. She walked to the window. Seoul stretched out below, lights fighting against the snow, the river dark and steady, the city breathing beneath its frozen blanket. She had come here to escape places where survival meant compromise. But survival always meant compromise. The only question was which compromises you could live with. If I stay, she said slowly, how many lines will I have to cross? Kong Min-jae was silent for a long moment. Then he walked to stand beside her. Not close. Just present. I don't know, he said. It was the first time he had admitted uncertainty. The first time, he hadn't controlled the answer. Will you tell me when I'm crossing them? She asked. No. Why not? Because that's not how this works. You decide what you can tolerate. I decide what I need. And we see if those things align. She looked at him. That's not protection. I never offered protection, he said. I offered a position. The distinction mattered. Amma turned back to the window. The snow was beginning to slow. Morning would come. The city would wake. The house would return to its rhythm of locked doors and silent tests. And she would still be standing here, deciding. I need time, she said. You have it. How much? Until you leave. Or until you don't. Kong Min-jae walked to the door. He paused at the threshold. The man in Busan, he said. The one you saved. Before he died, he told me something. Amma waited. He said you didn't hesitate. The fire was spreading. Everyone else was running away. And you went in. I was trained to. No, Kong Min-jae said. You were trained to assess. You chose to act. He left the room. The door closed. Amma stood alone in the study, watching the snow. She thought about fire. She thought about silence. She thought about the difference between choosing danger and having danger choose you. Outside, Seoul continued its slow transformation beneath the snow. Beautiful, cold, unforgiving. Inside, the house waited. Kong Min-jae waited. The question waited. How many lines will I have to cross? And beneath it, the question she hadn't asked aloud. How many have I already crossed without noticing? The story does not end with her answer. It does not end with safety. It does not end with closure. It ends with Amma standing at the window, watching the city wake, knowing that every choice from here forward would be measured not in right or wrong, but in what she could carry. And what she couldn't leave behind. The snow fell. The silence held. And the house, dangerous, watchful, patient, remained.